This is Cornstalks and Sports Talk, your go-to Iowa-based sports show, hosted by the one and only Eliot Clough.
What's up, Cedar Valley, and hello to the Hawkeye State. This is Cornstalks and Sports Talk, your Iowa-based sports show here on AM 950 KOEL and KOEL.com. It's with me, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter. I'm a UNI Insider for Townsquare Media. And it is the day we've all been waiting for here in Iowa, the Cy-Hawk game, of course, which happens every year between Iowa and Iowa State. If you're going, I'm jealous. If you're watching on TV, me too. That's at 3 p.m. Central, of course, and that'll be on the Big Ten Network. And we've got Nick Osen, who's from Cyclone Alert, and David Eickholt from Hawkeye Insider, both, of course, from 24/7 Sports. They're the beat writers covering Iowa State football and basketball and Iowa basketball and Iowa football. So we're going to do a little conversation with both of them over the second and third segments this morning to preview that. So brand spanking new. We're getting everything ready to preview the game here on Cornstalks and Sports Talk. Again, that's at 3, so we're getting it way ahead of time. And if you miss any part of that, you can always listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and that segment altogether is on YouTube as well. Just search Eliot Clough. So do all that before we get started today. Make sure you're subscribed, make sure you follow, make sure you leave that rate and review because it does really help us out a lot. And we want to get more exposure for Iowa sports, particularly the team that I cover as a UNI Insider, Northern Iowa. They're also playing this weekend at 3 p.m., so I'll be watching both games more closely, the UNI game, but they're taking on North Dakota, playing in Grand Forks at the Alaris Center. And this is a big game for the Panthers for a variety of reasons, several specific big reasons and facts that you should know going into this game. Number one, Coach Farley has never played at the Alaris Center. It's only been around for 21 years. The last time these two teams played was 2006. That was in Cedar Falls. Of course, UND was still a D2 powerhouse at that point in time. They came into Cedar Falls and beat the Panthers, who were already D1, beat them 35-31. Again, that was in 2006, so quite a while ago. Coach Farley, like I said, hasn't played at the Alaris Center against these Hawks, just at home, but he has kind of, sort of, in a way, played against their head coach, Bubba Schweigert. I can never remember how to pronounce that last guy's name right. He's a good coach, though. He was the defensive coordinator for Southern Illinois from 2008 to 2013, and UNI played against them over that time span. Both teams, of course, in the Missouri Valley Football Conference. And between 2008 and 2013, when Schweigert was their defensive coordinator, UNI and Coach Mark Farley went 1-5 against the Salukis over that time span. And UND, another negative for UNI heading into this. UND has won 35 straight home openers. 35 straight. Goes all the way back to when they were a D2 powerhouse, and now as a D1 member, as a member of the D1 level of football, playing in the Missouri Valley Football Conference, the toughest conference in all of the FCS. They've won 35 straight home openers. That they refer to it as the Potato Bowl. I don't know. Are potatoes a thing in North Dakota? I thought that was Idaho. Anyway, their opening game was always the Potato Bowl. Couldn't tell you why. No idea. Apparently it's a big deal, and the Alaris Center can get pretty loud, but UNI's used to playing in a dome. They haven't played North Dakota in quite a while, but I feel like this is a team that UNI kind of sees on a regular basis. They're another sort of ground and pound, but can throw the ball kind of team. They went 5-6 last year, 3-5 in the MVFC after starting the season ranked in the top 10, going 5-2 in the season prior in that COVID season in the spring. So they're a good football team. Last season, all of their losses except for against FBS Utah State were by single digits, and single digits to really good teams like North Dakota State, like Missouri State, like South Dakota State. So they're good. They're good. They actually, well, never mind. They stole a win against South Dakota State during that spring season. So they've got skill. They've got talent. They are coming off a loss to Nebraska last week. They lost 38-17 after being tied at 17-17 in the third quarter. So they fought with the Cornhuskers. You know, we like to make jokes about Nebraska, about how Scott Frost added to the stupidity of Nebraska football. I have that article. It's on the KOEL.com website if you want to give that a read and laugh at Nebraska a little bit on this Saturday morning before games start. But Nebraska, they're still an FBS team. They're still a Big Ten team. They're still a Power 5 team. And North Dakota hung with them for a little while. Now, their offense doesn't look to be super dangerous by any means. They're kind of a dink and dunk, death by 1,000 cuts offense. But all of a sudden, they're in the red zone and they're on your 2-yard line and they score with their power back, Tyler Huseman, who used to be a running back for UNI. That's sort of what I saw against that Nebraska team this last weekend. And I mean, overall, not really impressed. If I was to be impressed with anything, it'd be their defense. They run a few different defenses. I saw some 3-3-5. I saw some 4-3. I believe their 4-3 base defense is what they've got there. But that's what I was impressed with for them. Now, a few more things to watch for UNI and North Dakota as we're talking about that game, previewing that game here on Corn Stalks and Sports Talk on AM 950 KOEL and KOEL.com. It's me, UNI Insider for Townsquare Media Eliot Clough. You can follow me on Twitter. It's at Eliot Clough. Now, the next thing that I'm watching for in this game, Northern Iowa versus North Dakota, is that run defense for UNI. And when you don't know the name UNI, you don't know FCS football, you look at that and you think, wow, this team is terrible at run defense. Well, here's the thing. I'm talking about last week, of course, when they took on Air Force and allowed 582 yards on the ground. Here's the thing. All of last season, over 12 games, UNI allowed just 1,045 yards rushing, 87 yards rushing per game to opposing offenses. And, well, you look at Air Force, and they have perfected the triple option. It's what their football team is known for. They ran the ball. Wait for it. They ran the ball 62 times. 62 times against UNI. That's inevitable. You're going to rack up yards one way or another. And granted, there are a few chunk plays, and UNI was taken advantage of, especially on the outside. The downfield blocking for Air Force, impeccable. I don't know that it could get any better. How good they were at blocking for the triple option, not just for their running backs, but for their quarterbacks too. And so what I see and hear is based on that run defense, those yards allowed, is, you got to try to take advantage of the UNI run defense. Well, I'm not necessarily with that. I think what other teams are going to see is that we'll see what Air Force did on the perimeter and say, if our big guys can block downfield, we'll have our way with UNI defense. I don't necessarily see that happening. I don't think any other team in the country is going to be able to take advantage of UNI the way Air Force did with their triple option. So I presume that UND is going to try to attack on the ground, and they're just not going to get anything done. They have Tyler Huseman, who I mentioned will be their power back, and then they have Isaiah Smith, who's more of their speed guy on the outside. He's been there for a little while. He ran the ball 10 times for 104 yards and a touchdown last week, so it's sort of a thunder and lightning kind of thing they've got going on back there with the former UNI running back Tyler Huseman. And so that's the guy that worries me the most. It's the perimeter stuff, because it's like Coach Farley said, in the interior, that's where they were strong with Devin Rice, Caden Hoteling, and of course, guys like Spencer Cuvalier, Christian Boyd, Bryce Flater. But on the outside, that's where they were taken advantage of. Secondarily to that, we've ranted and raved about the pass defense all offseason long. And I mean, when you've got guys in the defensive backfield like Benny Sapp III, Corby Sander, Woo Governor, Stephon Black, Edwin Dearman, Miguel Edwards, Jonathan Fenix, Damian Krumity. You've heard me say those names a bunch of times here on Corn Stalks and Sports Talk. It should be a strength. But we don't know. We haven't seen it yet. And I'm expecting it to be a strength. This is not a, whoa, gosh, we have to watch the pat. No, that's not what it is. Air Force threw the ball 6 times last week. 62 of their plays were run plays. 6 plays were passing plays. They completed 3 of 6. 1 was for an 80-yard touchdown. So there's not really much to take away in terms of real play that you've seen in front of your face. I've been to practice, so it's a little bit different. I have high expectations for them. I know Benny. I know Corby. I know Woo. I know Steph. Edwin, I'm really impressed with everything that I've seen from these guys so far in practice against really talented receivers that UNI has. But we'll see. That's just something to be aware of. Just the fact that we haven't really seen it in action yet. I fully expect them to play well. I'm not a believer in Tommy Schuster, their quarterback. I mean, just look at last week's stats, and he went 24 of 37. They passed the ball 37 times. This is a very different team than Air Force. And he only he only threw for 131 yards and a touchdown. I'm expecting UNI to get a pick. I mean, he might throw for a few more yards. He just doesn't impress me. He looks out there. I mean, he started for 2 years. This is his third season as the starter. He looks like a high school quarterback to me, if I'm being honest. I'm not impressed with Tommy Schuster at all. Now, at least in terms of his mechanics, you know, he might go out and pass for 200, 300 yards and 3 touchdowns and make me look stupid, but I'm not impressed with him. I haven't seen a ton of him. I'm not impressed. Now, lastly, going into this game, the one thing, the key thing that we've all focused on this offseason is that new look offense for the Panthers. And we got to see a glimpse of what it could be last week. We got to see a very small glimpse of what it could be against a talented Air Force team. Theo Day passing for 286 yards and 2 touchdowns. Basically, the real thing that we saw and what I got a lot of hope from was at the beginning of these drives, this team was like, that we have never seen anything like this before with the UNI offense. I mean, I've been told by several people on staff and players, the offense is at a level it hasn't been at in a long time. A guy who's been around for 5+ years told me, I've never seen the offense look like this. And it's not that hard to improve off last year's offense, but this is an offense where these guys are getting the ball. They're getting it out quick. They're making a play. They're in the middle of the field's wide open. The wide open parts of the field are the middle and the way outside. And Theo Day can get it there. His timing was good. He was getting it to Logan Wolf. He was getting it to Quan Hampton. He was getting it to Deion McShane. The speed and the athleticism of the offense are all being shown. It's not just one or the other. It's not ground and pound. Yeah, you can hand the ball off, but yeah, you're going to trust Theo Day to make a play too and trust his wide receivers therefore. Unfortunately, first drive was going well. Jared Penning got a penalty. I believe it was false start, if I remember correctly. And then a few drives later, Theo Day throws a ball over the middle when he had Sam Schnee in the flat open. Probably could have gotten 5 to 10 yards on that. He goes over the middle. It goes off the fingers of Logan Wolf. It's picked off. Later in that same, it was the first half, and UNI was driving about to score to make it 20-10, and then Theo goes forward on an undesigned quarterback run, fumbles the ball at the 5-yard line. To me, it looked like he was down, but it was determined that he did fumble the ball, and Air Force took over and then scored, and it made it 27-3. So a variety of things went wrong. It was the first game of the season. It's against an FBS opponent that's constantly one of the best in the country, probably top 40 team in the nation. And so, you know, things like that just go wrong, and they continued to pile up. Now, against an FCS opponent, second game of the season, you've been able to get your feet under you. You're not at altitude. I really expect UNI to step up offensively today. I really do. You dismiss that penalty, you dismiss that fumble, you dismiss that pick. Certain little things made that game go awry, and UNI was right in the thick of it. I believe in this offense. I believe in this defense. We'll really get to look at it today in this matchup with UND. I'm excited. I'm taking the Panthers. I think UNI is going to pull out the victory and start the season 1-1, go into this game against Sacramento State in the Dome with some confidence. I'm really excited about that. And avoiding 0-2 is big here. This is a big game for the Panthers. You can't go 0-2 and then play one of the top teams in the FCS in Sacramento State and then go into conference play, be 0-3 in the Missouri Valley Conference, the Missouri Valley Football Conference. That is not a good way to start your season. So, very important game. Very important that the Panthers pull it out and get the victory. Now, stick around. Iowa versus Iowa State happening today, of course. We got Nick Osen and David Eickholt, both from 24/7 Sports, regulars on the show. Great guys. They do awesome stuff They're joining us at the same time to preview Iowa versus Iowa State over the next two segments. I'm excited. It's going to be really fun. Stay right here on Cornstalks and Sports Talk on AM 950, KOEL, and KOEL.com. We've got a new look show today here on Cornstalks and Sports Talk. Two guests at the same time. David Eickholt and Nick Osen of 24/7 Sports. David covers the Hawkeyes, Nick the Cyclones, both regulars here on Cornstalks and Sports Talk. We appreciate them joining at the same time. And like I said, two full segments ahead of this Iowa versus Iowa State game this weekend. And I think the glaring question for everybody right now is regarding the Hawkeyes. And David, I'll start with you. What's it going to take for Coach Ferentz to bench Spencer Petras?
Well, I'll tell you, I think Brian Ferentz brought up a couple of good points yesterday, and I thought he was very accountable. Number one, he said it starts with me and I failed, but he was disheartened and shocked by Iowa's lack of production against South Dakota State. But the thing that really stood out to me, guys, was some of the most damning criticism I've heard Brian say. And he said, I felt there's ample opportunity for the quarterback to deliver the ball where it needed to go. And he says, I'm all in on Spencer Petras, but that comment, guys, if Petras doesn't score in the first half, I think Petras is fighting for his job right now. I think he's back against the wall. I think Eliot, you and I talked preseason about a potential quarterback switch, and I said it's going to be after two games if it's going to happen, because then Iowa hosts Nevada, and then they go in a Big Ten play. And I think it'd be foolish to switch when they go at Rutgers. I mean, Rutgers is fresh off a big win against Boston College. I thought they looked pretty reliable, but I think Iowa right now, their backs are against the wall. Petras backs against the wall. And while I think Petras has a lot to do, I think he missed like 8 throws where I'm just like, dude, you got to hit at least half those, at least half of them. But Iowa's averaging 1.6 yards carry. Iowa's offensive line was not great. There was no help. Like, there was no bright spot, maybe besides Arlen Bruce getting the ball and being the focal point of that team, which I think he needs to be offensively. But for Iowa to switch, I think it's going to take another failed half from Spencer Petras. Maybe Iowa rides out the whole game. But if Petras doesn't get together, I'll be shocked if he starts next week.
And Nick, for the Cyclone vantage point, I'm assuming that D-line is just licking their chops, man.
Yeah, I think a major thing for Iowa State's defense this week, kind of on multiple levels, is Will McDonald. I know that's someone we've talked about on this show, obviously. By his standards, he had a bit of a quiet week one. I think SEMO was getting the ball out pretty quickly. And as David mentioned, there's not really a fallback plan, at least from what Iowa showed in week one as well. So McDonald has to kind of make the most of that, whether that's getting pressure on Petras, whether that's stepping up in the run game a little bit when Iowa has to kind of try to establish the run to build up that offense. I think it's going to be really interesting. I think there's a lot of confidence within that defensive line. And I almost figure the whole defense is pretty excited, not because of Petras or any necessarily opportunity like that, but because they know they have not forced turnovers in the series. I know that's something Dave and I have hit on a lot this week. And the Cyclones need to not only take advantage, but kind of turn that tide in order to get that first win under Matt Campbell against the Hawkeyes.
And David, when you're talking about missing 8 throws, I mean, it's not you talking about it. It's Coach Brian Ferentz talking about it. It's got to be the yips, right? He's got to be in his head.
I think it was a sign of a broken quarterback, Eliot. And my thing is, look, there's some throws. I think you give him a break on half of them. I'll give him a break on half. But there are throws where any not even Power 5 quarterback, any FCS and Division I quarterback has to hit. I think of 3 specific ones come to mind. One, there was a screen play to LaShawn Williams, which probably would have been a touchdown. Spencer sold the fake really well. He had a hand in his face, completely overthrew LaShawn. Again, third-year starter, you need to know where your guy is at. You should be able to do that throw blindfolded. You really should. It's not a complicated throw. Get right over the hands of the defense. Let it softly land in the running back's hands, because they're not going to be able to charge all at LaShawn quickly. There's going to be 2 or 3 blockers up front. It was beautifully set up. I think there was a 5-yard out route to Sam Laporta, completely missed him. And the one that I think drove Iowa fans nuts, was he threw in a double coverage to a fullback who is the 4th option on the play. Arlen Bruce is wide open over the middle. Alec Wicks also wide open. You just got to be able to keep your head up, and you got to be able to look for those sort of targets. And the second you see a quarterback aim his short passes, that's a broken quarterback. And Petrus began to aim the passes, and Iowa fans' boos were in full force, and it's hard to blame them. I think you talk about simplifying the offense. Well, you simplified it to the point where you can't get over 3 yards of play against an FCS school. So Iowa needs to throw everything against the wall. I think getting Gavin Williams back will be a nice boost. I think he's going to play. And again, Iowa has 2 scholarship receivers available. That's difficult for anybody. That's on the coaching staff, I believe. But third-year starting quarterback has to get done.
Yeah, exactly. And for you, Nick, covering the Cyclones, I mean, I'm sure you've watched the film from last week. And granted, again, you don't cover the Hawkeyes, but have you seen something like this before anywhere else? What Spencer's doing right now?
Offensive struggles?
Yeah.
Not a ton. I actually told David that I was watching the film, mostly looking at Iowa's defense, and he said, "I'm sorry you had to watch that." I believe it.
Well, I said that, and I'm like, dude, I had rewatched it twice, but like I said, there's no cocktail strong enough to help get me through that rewatch. It was horrible.
It was something that I came into this year, especially I think for an Iowa State writer, I've been high on both teams, Iowa State and Iowa. I thought that Iowa would absolutely be a contender in the Big Ten West. That's a spot I'm very familiar with growing up in, Wisconsin. I knew the defense would be the strength, and I didn't necessarily figure Petrus to be a star, but I thought there were some nice pieces. I like a couple of their running backs. Sam Laporta is really good. And I agree with Dave that I think Bruce can be kind of a focal point out wide, a wide receiver. But when you don't have a lot of scholarship guys at the position as it is, there's some injuries or other things going on at the position. And yeah, I mean, I think that the yips, like you mentioned, I think that gets thrown around fairly often, but this might be something like it because Petrus is not new to the program. He's not even new as a starter. And from what I saw, the playbook didn't look too complex, especially going against a good defense, but an FCS defense at that. So I certainly didn't expect that. And I think very well that, Iowa wasn't too far away from losing that game. I would think based on how they scored. I know Dave can speak to that a little more, but I think 2 safeties and a field goal, that's not very encouraging after week 1.
I will say about Iowa's defense, and this is not to praise Iowa to some extent, but Iowa's defense didn't let them get across midfield. The only time they got across midfield was during the interception that Petrus threw. And then I think they went backwards, or they gained 5 yards on that field goal drive. So Iowa's defense essentially gave up 0 points, and they outscored everybody. The coordinator that scored the most between both teams was Phil Parker, which is crazy to think about. And like you said, I like that you brought up that Iowa's playbook didn't look overly complex. Now, Iowa's playbook's usually not that complex in the first place, but it looked even more limited with 2 scholarship wide receivers. But I would also argue, I think Petrus needs to trust Alec Wickmore. I know he's a walk-on, but this is a guy that I think could have been a scholarship FCS guy, could have been a low D1 guy. He's one of the most productive receivers in the state of Iowa high school history, and he doesn't drop anything. I mean, talking to Arlen Bruce during media day, he quoted, "He's a dog. You can quote me on that. He's a dog. He's going to be on scholarship someday." And that's not just throwing around praise. I mean, that, from talking to people, he's not overly quick, but his routes are sharp. He doesn't drop anything. But Petrus was so tunnel visioned on Saturday, and I think that's what's most concerning among other things. And I think, again, you look at the way he threw it to Monty Potabom, his throws to Laporta. I mean, Laporta only had 2 catches for 9 yards. That needs to be inexcusable. That needs to be at the top of the scouting report for Iowa's offense, even more than ranking the football. Guys, you have a top 3, top 4 tight end in college football. I think the Georgia tight ends are up there. I think the Notre Dame, Michael Mayer needs to be up there from Notre Dame. But Sam Laporta is legit top 2, top 3 on type talent at tight end. I mean, I think he could have gone last year and gotten drafted decent. So I think Iowa, I don't want to say that you go back to the drawing board, but they got to start throwing stuff against the wall against Iowa State, because we know, I think Nick agrees, they're going to be throwing everything they can against this Iowa defense, because this is a game that, while both teams are going to downplay it, they want. Iowa State wants it so bad, because I told Nick, I think a win for them would be huge for the Matt Campbell era and help try to propel them to where they want to get to.
Again, we're talking with Nick Osen and David Eickholt from 24/7 Sports here on Corn Stalks and Sports Talk on AM 950 KOEL and KOEL.com. Iowa and Iowa State taking on each other today at 3 p.m. Going to go back to you, Nick, here. So the Cyclones offense, granted against SEMO, looked pretty damn good last week. Xavier Hutchinson is real. Obviously, Jyrell Brock had that nasty run. And of course, Hunter Decker's making his first start for the season. What are your thoughts on the offense, Nick? Is it good enough to compete against this Hawkeye defense that's one of the best in the country?
Yeah, I would say absolutely nothing shocked me from that game. And I can say that with confidence because, again, I've said it with you. From what I saw from Hunter Decker since it was late March, early April, I thought that I saw a new and improved quarterback compared to what he's kind of shown on film previously against schools like Iowa and Oklahoma. I think he's legitimately going to be a top 3 or 4 guy in the Big 12. This year, potentially next year, we'll kind of see what that looks like. Hutchinson, maybe I didn't expect 3 touchdowns, but that's one of the best wideouts really in the country, obviously in the conference. And then I think what I was maybe most impressed by is the offensive line might not have been perfect, but I think they were able to find time and success in both the pass and the run game. And when you've got 3 or 4 legitimate options at tailback in Jyrell Brock, Cartavius Norton, you won't likely see him this week, Eli Sanders, and then Deion Silas, who actually got in the end zone, well, that opens up a lot of different things. I actually asked offensive coordinator Tom Manning about it. Didn't go into a ton of detail, but basically that's a spot where if you establish the run game against a tough, strong, physical defense like Iowa, that kind of gives you that extra layer of the offense, of the playbook to give more time and opportunities to Deckers. And somebody that I expect to see a little more out of is Jalen Knoll this week. I think he had 5, maybe 6 catches. I want to say 6, but not for a lot of yards. A lot of them were very close to the line of scrimmage. And just pure talent-wise, he's one of the most talented players on the team. Not better than X yet, but he can run routes. He's quick, really good hands. And so that's someone that I figure. And then I'll throw in briefly someone that made a catch or 2 and could have had some more yards, Dimitri Stanley. I think speed is an area where you can potentially get past the back end of Iowa's defense. And that's where I'd look at the Colorado transfer wideout Dimitri Stanley to potentially be a game changer if Manning trusts Deckers to open up the playbook.
David, where are you at with Iowa State's offense versus the Hawks defense?
Yeah, contrary to a lot of Iowa State fans' belief, I actually think that there's a lot of talent on this Iowa State offense. I really do. I think Hunter Deckers has a higher ceiling than Brock Purdy. I told Nick this the other day. I don't think he should be anointed as being better than Brock Purdy because I don't know how you go from having a generational talent like Purdy to being like, oh yeah, successor's better. He's going to face a lot of pressure going into Kinnick Stadium. I think this is by far his biggest test yet. I think Iowa's defense is preparing for trick plays, preparing for them to go deep down the field. And I told Nick, I think they need to throw the ball downfield often to X, because even if Iowa intercepts it, Iowa's offense hasn't proven they can move the football. So why not keep testing them deep? I think Jyrell Brock has a lot of talent. Iowa wanted him, but Iowa took Tyler Goodson and sort of backed off Brock. And who knows if he chose Iowa State or Iowa, but Iowa was the leader for a long time there. But physical runner can get stuff done. I like the running back by committee. But I'm very eager to see if Deckers makes a mistake, how he bounces back from it. I thought he looked really, really good last week. I think he's more athletic than Purdy. He's built different than Purdy. I think he has more arm strength so he can throw the ball down the field. But I'm very curious if when Iowa doesn't run its prevent defense and if he gets backed up with Torrey Taylor, who I put together an incredible game. I mean, Iowa fans were chanting MVP for the punter last week, for God's sake. Like, that's kind of where we're at, right? But if he gets in that north end zone, people don't realize how loud that is. Since they've redone it, last week against South Dakota State, there was 9 false starts by South Dakota State. So if you get back in that north end zone, get pinned to the 10, back-to-back false starts because you can't hear anything with a young quarterback, Iowa might be coming for blood at that point. But I think Deckers has a lot of talent, but I've said before, even with Justin Jacobs out, I think Iowa has the best linebacking room in the country as far as depth goes, as far as talent goes. I think Jack Campbell's the second best linebacker in the country. I think Will Anderson from Alabama is unequivocally number one. I think it depends if you consider him an edge or a linebacker. He plays sort of a hybrid of both. But Jack Campbell, I think, is incredibly undervalued nationally just because of his crazy, crazy production. But it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm very, very eager to see, Trevor Downing versus this Iowa. See, if Lucas Van Ness breaks out for Iowa. I mean, there's a lot of really, really good out there, and ours are going to be tough to come by for both teams. I really do. I think I'd put more faith in Iowa State's offense, even against this Iowa defense, because of how bad Iowa's offense was last week. You need to be able to see the improvement.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break from this conversation with 24/7 sports beat writers for Iowa and Iowa State, Nick Osen and David Eickholt, here on Cornstalks and Sports Talk this Saturday morning. But don't go anywhere. We're continuing it in just one moment. Stay right here for more Cornstalks and Sports Talk. And we're back here on Cornstalks and Sports Talk for this third and final segment on a Saturday morning. Nick Osen and David Eickholt are doing a dual conversation here on this second and third segment of today's episode. So we're going to get right back to it. Here's David Eickholt, Nick Osen, and myself previewing Iowa versus Iowa State happening today at 3 p.m.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Jamari Harris is doubtful too, right?
Correct. He was suspended week 1 due to an off-season arrest, but I mean, you got Terry Roberts, and I thought Roberts played tremendous last week, and that's a guy who's been in the program. I mean, it's nuts to me that Iowa can lose 3 core members of their secondary, and people think they're even better than they were last year, but alas, here we are.
Now, you mentioned that's I think you said the south end zone at Kinnick, since it was reconstructed.
The north
side.
Yeah.
Considering how poorly last week went, are you still saying that for the Iowa offense playing in Kinnick, is it still an advantage for the Hawkeyes?
I'm very curious how Iowa fans react when the offense takes the field. And this is something I've talked about. One, I think Scott Dochterman from The Athletic brought this up. And by the way, like, Spencer Petras is a really good dude. Like, I've gotten to know him just from covering him, talking to people around the area, talking to coaches. He's a great leader, great kid. But after all the boo birds last week, and I'm not saying this would happen. I don't want to come across as I'm indicting Iowa fans. So it's not true. But if he gets hurt, how are Iowa fans going to react? And it sounds gross. It really does. And Petras' family will be in the stands. You don't want to hear that. But they get you and Alex Padilla has to go in. And if so, I just think you lose faith in a lot. I really do. I think even the Iowa players are going to be pretty ticked off of that, and I would be too. I think it's wrong. I think for any fan base to cheer for another injury is just devastating. And I think John Miller brought this up. He used to cover the Hawkeyes for 25 years or so. If I'm an Iowa fan, I think you give the offense standing ovation when they take field for the first time. I think it's very similar to what I don't know if you saw the clip I tweeted of Jack Campbell, his post-game speech. I think that would be the Iowa fans' way of doing the same thing that Jack Campbell did. Try to give Iowa that psychological boost. Just say, hey, we believe in you. You can go out there and do it. But to your point, I think playing in Kinnick's always going to be an advantage because when Iowa's defense is out there, the fans are going to go absolutely crazy. But I'm eager to see how much patience Iowa fans have for their offense when they take the field on Saturday.
Nick, you have any thoughts on that, whether or not this advantage in Kinnick will be there or how the fans will react to the offense?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's as much about that or rather just how loud that place can be. Kind of like Dave mentioned, I've been there, cover a Badgers game or two when I was in college. It's a special place to play, just from what I've seen so far and even kind of things we've seen on our message boards and things like that. This rivalry is insane, truly. I mean, I said it months back and I really stick by it. It's one of the most intense that I've seen. So I would think overall that works as an advantage for Iowa. I didn't necessarily see or hear as many of the boos. I know that they were well documented on Twitter and things like that. But I don't know. I just feel like if you're someone like Petras that's been around this long and you know what this rivalry is like, you maybe don't let that kind of thing get into your head. So in that sense, I would give it as an advantage to the Hawkeyes. Though I think Iowa State's going to come in prepared. Obviously, field position is going to be an enormous thing in this game that probably is not going to feature a ton of points. I know many people have been betting on the under there as well, as we kind of hit on last night, Dave. So truly, just from a fan of football that I am, I'm really excited to see not only the atmosphere, but the fact that we get to see schematically and the X's and O's and things like that. There is a football game to decide all of this. And I think that Dave is right that it means a lot to both programs, even when it is downplayed, or maybe they're not giving out the surefire quotes or depth on the rivalry and things like that. I think it's a big deal. And I truly can't wait for that game.
Again, we're talking with Nick Osen and David Eickholt from 24/7 Sports here on Cornstalks and Sports Talk on AM 950, KOEL and KOEL.com, previewing that Iowa versus Iowa State game happening today. Now, what are the Hawkeyes going to do to try to stop Xavier Hutchinson? Do you expect, you said you expect the ball to go deep, David. What are they going to do? Is there any a specific plan you expect for defending Xavier Hutchinson?
I think you put Riley Moss on wherever Xavier lines up. I think you have to put the preseason All-American on there. Meaning people look at Riley Moss, and because Xavier, there's a lot that makes him special. I think his straight line speed obviously is a huge deal. Riley Moss, people forget, he was like 7th nationally in the 110-meter hurdles in high school. Like, that dude is not a slow human being. I like the idea of having him there, and I like the idea of having Kayvon Merriweather at safety, just sort of being that spy on X when he does go deep. And that's something that Merriweather is going to take very personally, because there was a play last week, and Nick, I don't know how much of the Iowa game you watched, but there was a play of South Dakota State. Kayvon got turned around the wrong way, and Gronowski, the South Dakota State quarterback, just overthrew him. But if he converts that throw, that's probably a touchdown for South Dakota State, and who knows how the game ends up going from that standpoint after that. So I think he's going to be very disciplined on this. He preached eye discipline is going to be a huge deal. But if I'm Phil Parker, I have Riley Moss absolutely glued to him. I think Riley Moss is more of a playmaker, but I would also argue that maybe Terry Roberts, while he's a little bit smaller than Riley Moss, Roberts is a more physical cornerback. So it depends if Iowa wants to have a guy that can probably keep up better, or if they want to try to physically wear him down at the line, which I think Roberts would do a better job at that point.
What are you expecting, Nick?
Honestly, I think they show a little bit of both. I think that Moss is, not only maybe a little bit more the obvious choice, but he's a special player. However, I kind of like, from a sheer football and Iowa perspective, like Dave mentioned, the fact to maybe get things a little more physical initially closer to the line could potentially provide some issues there as well. But honestly, I mean, I'm sure Dave would agree. I think that either way, X is going to get some of his. I mean, he's that good. Yeah. And it'll just be kind of the sheer volume of how much of that he can get, because he was essentially the offense along with Deckers for nearly half the game last week, at least in terms of points. Obviously, Jirel was running the ball well and some other guys were getting involved. But I don't think that's a player. I think he's good enough. You can't fully take him away. It's just kind of reducing the effect that he can do. And that's why I mentioned Knoll so often. I'm not really sure kind of who would provide the most speed in and outside of the slot in Iowa secondary, but that's a spot where Knoll will definitely be able to showcase that. And he's a factor in the return game as well. I know we've been talking about kind of punting and field position. That is a big thing in college football, and this game's no different.
I would say, just for the Knoll perspective, I think Cooper DeJean will be glued to him if Iowa runs that 4-2-5. And I know some Iowa State fans weren't happy about how much I praised Cooper DeJean, but Cooper DeJean is, first of all, I think he's the most decorated high school athlete in the state of Iowa history. And what he did, I know, Elliot, you're more accustomed to kind of known at least his accomplishments just because Nick's from Iowa State. But Cooper's a freak. And his teammates have said he's a freak. He can keep up with Jalen Knoll. He is fast enough. Doesn't have quite the game experience that Jalen does, but I like the idea of having Cooper on him. And I will say X will get his own. I think that's a given. I think anybody who says they can completely shove him down, unless you're Sauce Gardner and you're still playing college football, I mean, I don't think anybody else can shove him down. But I think Iowa's big deal, and this is what they preach week in and week out, is they're going to try to limit the big plays. If Xavier gets his own, it's going to be on 6 to 8 yard routes and not 25 to 30 vertical routes. Iowa's not going to at least give up an easy one. Like, it's going to be a great play by X, or Iowa's just going to shoot itself in the foot 1-2 times, maybe one time a game where they miss the coverage. But if Deckers recognizes it and makes the play, there'll be an opportunity there. But a Phil Parker disciplined secondary really doesn't get too turned around too much. And I can tell you for a fact that Parker probably harped on Kayvon for tens of 20s of minutes on that one play, along with the rest of that secondary. So it's going to be definitely a fun battle to watch. And I'm very interested to see how Deckers tries to get everybody else involved. And again, I think this is a huge, huge deal for Deckers going forward, because if he gets it done against Iowa, then I think you're talking about a really, really special player, just because we haven't seen a quarterback lately for Iowa State get over that Iowa hurdle. And if Deckers passes the test on his first major test as a college football quarterback, man, that dude's swagger is going to go up. And from what I've been talking to you, Nick, and reading about him, the dude does not lack confidence whatsoever.
So, Nick, I'm going to go back to you for this one. Which player, coach, somebody around the Cyclone program, who's facing the most pressure going into this game?
You said it can be a coach as well?
Yeah.
Though I don't think the pressure is like last season, because of obviously the face is gone and because Iowa is favored and obviously the game's at Kinnick, I think the honest answer would probably be Matt Campbell, simply because it hasn't happened yet. Hunter Deckers, obviously the quarterback, he appears to potentially be a budding star, but this is his second start, his first full season as a starter. And Campbell has been around and has done some really, really, really good things in the scope of college football, especially for this Iowa State program. That was in a tough spot before he came. So there's no question about that. And again, coaches aren't necessarily going to go into the depths of what this game means or, compared to the other contests on the schedule. But if you ask me to pick a person, I think it would be Campbell, because he's established himself as one of the top 12 to 18 coaches in college football, maybe 20 at least. And just with this turnaround, he's had other opportunities. And I think it would mean a lot to him, not only as a coach, but like Dave said, as this program moving forward in terms of recruiting, winning on the recruiting trail, and just building the ceiling of what Iowa State could be.
Same question to you, David. Spencer Petras is the easy choice, but obviously him. Is there anybody else that you see having a good amount of pressure going into this game?
Let's go with easy answer number 2, Brian Ferentz.
Okay.
I mean, you talk about coordinator. There's no coordinator in the country that has as much pressure as Brian Ferentz does right now, because you could argue if Kirk isn't the head coach of Iowa, Brian does not have a job, and that's based purely on statistics. And it's based purely on the decline of Iowa's offense over the past few years. Because I've said this on my preview podcast, if Iowa had a top 75 offense this year, I guarantee you they win the Big Ten West minimum. If Iowa has a top 35 offense, 40 offense, they're a national title contender. And that's why the Iowa fans, I think, get so frustrated, because they have 2 championship caliber phases of the game. But the one they don't is what drives college football, number 1. And 2, it's that bad. So I'd say Brian Ferentz needs to come out guns a-blazing. I don't care how many receivers are out. You have a third-year starting quarterback. You have pieces. Got to make a game plan, and you got to get it execute. And if Spencer Petras can't do it, put in Alex Padilla. And even if Alex Padilla hasn't shown you in practice what Spencer has, you need to at least show the fans we're trying something new on game day. We're trying to push the offense forward.
Gentlemen, last question before we let you go, because I know you're crazy busy this week. Nick, final score, who wins and why?
Yeah, I'm going to be consistent with what I said on my show when Dave kindly came on. The number of points for Iowa State has gone down a little bit throughout the week. I've got Iowa 16, Iowa State 17. I think that the Cyclones win. I think it's really close. I would go with that under on kind of the over-under scorecard. And I just feel like, yes, Iowa has the better defense from what we've seen, the home advantage. And mentally, they've been winning this battle, obviously, with getting all those wins and losses. But I'm obviously not, in the locker room and part of this team, but I just get this sense that there is an extra level of confidence with Deckers at the helm. I think there are some good defensive pieces, maybe not NFL talent all over, but some really good pieces. And I just like that Iowa State can run and pass the ball with Deckers. So I'm going to go a very short win for Iowa State.
David.
I have Iowa. And here's I have a couple of reasons. One, I've been consistent with Nick, and this is the way I approach every single one of these rivalry games and just winning streaks. I cannot pick a team that hasn't proven to me that they can beat a certain team. It's why I haven't picked Iowa against Wisconsin lately. It's why I hadn't picked them against Purdue until a couple of years ago when Iowa beat them. I stay consistent with that. Until they prove to me that they can win, I'm not picking them. I'm not picking Minnesota over Iowa. I'm not picking Nebraska over Iowa. And here's a couple things too, just to have some statistical backup. Since 2015, when Iowa played for the Big Ten championship, Iowa's been favored by fewer than 6 points 20 times. Iowa has won 19 of those games. The only loss coming in 2020 against Purdue. And in 16 of the 20 games, there was a spread of 3.5 or less. And Iowa's 15-1 outright, 12-4 against the spread in those games. And 4 of those wins came against Iowa State. There's a mental block for Iowa State in this game. Iowa has the advantage. They has been playing Kinnick since 2018. And this is going to be the first real test for Deckers. And I just don't know if he's ready for the big moment yet. I think he's going to be a dude. Iowa's crowd's going to be crazy, but Iowa's defense is among the best in the country. And I'd be very surprised if Deckers came out and carved him up. I think he'll have some success, but it's going to be a fun one. I have Iowa winning 17-16. I think Iowa State grabs a lead at one point. But I will say something that needs to be watched. I did not say this in the next podcast. I'm very curious if Iowa turns the ball over first, what the psychological impact's going to be, because Iowa hasn't turned it over in 5 years. And Campbell's well aware of that stat, and Iowa's well aware of that stat. Are they going to be psychologically broken? Who knows? I think that's what's going to make the game very, very interesting.
We will see. Two of the best to do it. Nick, you got something to say?
I was just going to say, so that score changed a little bit since last night as well. We have the same score now, just the other team each winning by a point.
Great stuff, guys. Two of the best in the business, at The Real Nick Osen on Twitter and David Eickholt on Twitter. Appreciate you guys. We'll see what happens today.
It's going to be interesting.
Alrighty, folks, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Corn Stalks and Sports Talk here on AM 950, KOEL, and KOEL.com. If you missed any part of today's show, you can always go back and listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. And this one will be ready and available right away in the morning on Saturday, even before this airs on the radio. So if you're listening there, please leave a rate and review and subscribe wherever you're at, whatever platform you're listening to this podcast. And you can always listen to us on YouTube. Our guest segments, of course, will be on my YouTube channel. Just search Eliot Clough. You'll find it right there. Or, of course, you can search Corn Stalks and Sports Talk. Once again, my name is Eliot Clough. I'm a UNI Insider for Townsquare Media, and you can find me on Twitter at Eliot Clough. This was another week's episode of Corn Stalks and Sports Talk on AM 950, KOEL, and KOEL.com.